I'm so excited to be here with you all, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Before we kick off our convo, I wanted to know if there's anything you guys want to say to the audience.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. This is a wonderful audience, and we love our readers, and even those who aren't our readers, we love you too, but not as much.
I used to always get very nervous at these kinds of events, and I would write out my introductory remarks. And, people I noticed would get kind of, bad look on their face when they saw 15, 20 pages of soiled sheets with notes all over them, knowing that it would take me 15 minutes to finish before we got started. So I want you all to be very comfortable here. I don't have no written notes at all. I put them all on my iPhone now. So I'm okay. Dear honored guests. Okay. Oh, that's the end. Thank you all for being here. Are we done?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
That was it. Thanks for being here. Thanks.
I apologize. Link didn't get the memo about how you're supposed to dress. I mean, it's a lovely shirt, but...
I think it's more than lovely. Those are fighting words.
It's a great shirt. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Mimi.
You're so welcome. Yeah. So your latest book, Angel of Vengeance, is out. And if we could just, to kick things off, tell us a little bit about the book and how it fits into the larger Preston Child universe.
Well, Angel of Vengeance is the third book in a trilogy that started with Bloodless and The Cabinet of Dr. Lang. Now, how many of you have read The Bloodless and The Cabinet of Dr. Lang? Wow. Well, anyway, we can't tell you anything about Angel of Vengeance. Everything's a spoiler, but it is I promise you that this book concludes. I'm so sorry we left you hanging after the last book. We must have gotten 10,000 angry emails. Even my wife was furious at me. She was reading The Cabinet of Dr. Lang, and she said, I thought, how are they going to wrap this up? And I got 10 pages from the end, and I realized those guys aren't going to wrap this up. Those sons of guns. Anyway.
It's even worse than that because Bloodless, the first book in the trilogy, also ended on a cliffhanger. So at that point, we left you hanging. And then the second book in the trilogy, Cabinet of Dr. Lang, was another cliffhanger, which could be considered leaving you well hanging, after two books like that.
All right.
It's a tough audience.
And so a lot of your characters show up throughout several different books, and we're following them through a myriad of different escapades. And you get to know them really well if you've read, the books over and over. And so I'm curious, how did you come up with some of your main characters that show up in a lot of your books?
Well, each character has sort of appeared in a different way, but I'll tell you where Pendergast came from. And then Lincoln is going to tell you where Constance Greene came from, because that's his favorite character. But Pendergast, Lincoln and I decided to write this book set in the Museum of Natural History. And so I wrote the first few chapters. I sent them to Link, and he called me up and he said, Doug, these are great chapters, I love them, but you got two cops in here. You've got like an Irish cop and you got an Italian cop, and they're basically the same character. And what we need to do is to fold those two cops together into one cop. That'll be D'Augusta. And then he said, we need to come up with a detective like no other detective that has ever been written about. And he went on in that vein, and I became really irritated. And this is the true story. I said very sarcastically, oh yeah, like what we need is like an albino from New Orleans. An albino FBI agent or whatever. And Lincoln said, let's work with that. And we started talking, and now Pendergast is not albino, but we decided he'd be very pale. And then we put him in a black suit. And then we said when he shows up at the crime scene, they're going to think he's the Undertaker. And he's a fish out of water. He's from New Orleans, but he's in New York City. and let's give him a Rolls Royce and make him really rich, and an aesthete, sort of an Oscar Wilde type. And in 15 minutes, he was standing in front of us, fully formed like Athena from the forehead of Zeus. True?
True, yes. And we want to apologize to any New Orleans albino, very pale people or anybody else who was offended by this narrative. But the funny thing about Pendergast is it took us 5 years to write the first book, Relic, because we never thought anybody would publish it. I've been in publishing myself at St. Martin's Press as an editor for about 8 years, and I had seen thousands of manuscripts cross my desk, and I know how hard it is for even a well-written, deeply thought, and carefully composed manuscript to ever get past the agent, the editor, and published. So I didn't really have a lot of hope for us. I knew we'd get it read by an agent, but that's it. So we basically, and he had his own, he thought he was going to be the next John McPhee, living out in Arizona writing, nonfiction books. So I had to keep pushing Doug to work on this monster, brain-eating monster book in New York City. But in any case, we really had a self-indulgent time of it. We made Pendergast the most extreme and, we thought, funny and strange FBI agent you could possibly imagine. And we gave him some of our best lines. We gave him some of the best lines of various 19th century wits that we'd come across. And by the time we were done, we found out that he had become a serious character for us. It took us about 8 books, or maybe 6 books, to find out that he was going to be dragging us around by the neck for the rest of our lives. And we were going to be happy about it. But when we published a book called Cabinet of Curiosities, we started to get, we started to hear drums, and whispers that you've got something here. And that was a real groundswell. And after that, Pendergast just struck a chord with readers, and he's unlike any other of the many cookie cutter or non-cookie cutter FBI agents / investigators you read about. And so we've run with them, and we've had fun, and we haven't looked back since.
And tell us a little bit about Constance Greene, too, because she's such a great character.
Okay. I won't get into the weeds on this because I don't want to give anything away or make your eyes glaze over. But in that book I mentioned, Cabinet of Curiosities, there's a character named Enoch Lang who was alive in the late 19th century and whose entire existence was distilled into one need: to create an arcanum, to extend his life. And he did not want to extend his life just to live a longer period of time. He had to develop this terrible device, potion, I'm not going to say what it was, and he knew it would take him more than 100 years to do it. So it turns out that Enoch Lang is Pendergast's ancestor, and Pendergast now lives in his house. But in Cabinet of Curiosities, there was a series of murders that began to take place that were exactly reminiscent of the murders that Enoch Lang committed in the late 19th century with the goal of extending his life. And so the question became in this book, is this some copycat crazy, or did Enoch Lang succeed and he's still out there killing? And that's the short version. You should count yourselves lucky. Constance was one of his subjects. And she ended up living with him because, well, I won't spoil that, but there was a reason for it. And she stayed young because she took as a guinea pig the Arcanum. And she lived in that house for 100 years. And until something happened to him, and she stopped taking the Arcanum. And when Pendergast inherited the house, he inherited Constance too, who turned out to be the world's biggest, most beautiful badass you've ever seen, at least in my opinion. And so, you know, she's stopped taking this drug, so she's aging normally now, but she has this writhing, poisonous hatred for Lang and what he did to her and her family. And so it's warped her. She's kind of crazy. You know, she's not afraid to do anything to get avenge or to protect those she loves. And over the course of writing these last 10 books, I developed a raging crush on her, which is the reason she's front and center these last 4 books.
She's an awesome character.
Thank you very much.
Great. And to that point, I feel like there are so many connecting ties and recurring characters in all of your books that I'm curious how you keep it all straight. Do you have some sort of like wall somewhere with like red string going across? That's what I'm envisioning in my mind.
Well, we don't keep it straight. We make mistakes, and then we hear from our readers, "What's the matter with you? Didn't you?" You know, we have to go back and read our books, but we have fans who have kept track of this much better than we have, and so sometimes we have to consult them and say, "Let's see now, does Pendergast hate opera music or love opera music?" No, he definitely hates opera. Okay, good. That's good to know.
The problem is that, you know, in about 50 years in Harvard somewhere, there's going to be the Lincoln Child Douglas Preston Memorial Library Collection, which historians will be, of course, flocking to study, you know, the development of the characters. But we can't take advantage of their research yet. So we just have to rely on our memory. And a lot of fans out there who have been so obsessed that they've created, you can find it on the web, this Pendergast family tree that goes back about 6 generations, and it's beautifully done. It's done like a real historian would do, and we reference that often when we can't remember who's related to who. But one reason that we ended this book the way we did was to tie off a lot of those loose ends, because over the course of these books, you know, it's like a lot of we're dragging all this impedimentum behind us. And now we can have Pendergast more or less free of some of this, what we found interesting, but still complicated material. So now each book can be a standalone mystery involving Pendergast and his D'Augusta, his cohort, or Constance, or whoever. And so to answer the question we've already been getting frequently, does this mean the end of Pendergast now that you've finished this whole series of this trilogy? And no, you know, we're going to keep writing Pendergast until either we die or somebody takes the pen away out of our hands.
And Doug, you brought up, I think your fans had told you that Pendergast doesn't like opera. Have there been any other sort of like, you know, conversations you've had with the fandom where, you know, you've gotten feedback about something, or, you know, they sort of introduced some ideas for Pendergast, or like an interaction that's inspired some of the happenings in your books?
Well, we do have fans who express their decided opinions. And I'm sure they're right, many of them are right out here, especially regarding whether Constance is ever going to sleep with Pendergast. Now, how many people think she should? How many people think she shouldn't? All right.
Right on.
All right, anyway. Maybe that's improper. But anyway, so yes, we have a lot of fans who express opinions about our characters. When are you going to kill off that Smithback? He's so damned annoying. We get so many emails about killing off Smithback. So we did that. And we said, we want to make sure that the readers know that he's really dead. He's not going to come back to life. So we showed his autopsy and had his brain sitting in a Tupperware container. So you know that he's dead. And then we got 10,000 emails. How could you have killed off Smithback? You're so terrible. Anyway, so you can't please everybody.
But the one thing that we're guaranteed to hear about from our readers is, here's a typical email. I've read your book since 1923, and I've enjoyed all of them. And, they're fantastically written, and I'll skip to the, but I'm not going to read them anymore because you killed a German Shepherd in this book. How dare you? Or you had a horse fall off a cliff in that book. How dare you, kill this poor animal? And,
Meanwhile, 30 people had their brains eaten in the book.
Yeah,
They weren't worried about that. They just were worried about the dog.
60 bad guys have been shot or whatever, but that didn't matter. So we tried our hardest to make it, if an animal had to die, it was necessary. Like in a recent book, we had a dog running off with a critical piece of evidence, and we never see him again. And so the sheriff shoots him, and it's his own dog. And we thought, how much more, heart-wrenching can you be than that? And we got more flack on that than anything. He shoots his own dog? My God. So
that was Link's idea.
No, it was your idea.
You know that. And I said, we're going to get a lot of emails about this. And Link said, yeah, let him come. Bring him on.
No, when we were discussing how to start the last book, I said to Doug, what should we do early on this book? And he said, well, we haven't killed any dogs in a while. What if we do?
He's lying.
So I think we're going to put in future books, in the copyright page, no animals were harmed in the writing of this book.
Well, we did. I will talk about Margot Greene. At one point, Link wanted
Tell
to
her
kill...
who she is.
Margot Greene was a character in Relic, and she was also in the movie. So Link suggested that maybe we off her.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
It was you who did that.
No, you did. It was your idea. And I said, maybe we better do a little research before we do that. So there was this bulletin board of our fans, our readers, where they would post opinions. So I went on the bulletin board anonymously, lurking, and I wrote, hey, I heard a rumor that the guys, Preston and Child, are going to kill Margot Greene in the next book. What do you all think about that? It was like 1,000 responses. If they do that, I'm never reading another book. I can't stand how they killed fine kids. It went on and on and on. So I showed that to Link, and I said, we better not do that. We better not play God with Margot Greene. So we didn't.
That's a lie, but I'll let it rest.
And on the topic of death, you have some really creative gruesomeness in your stories that I was impressed by. So I want to know, are you guys just constantly on Wikipedia, type, weirdest ways to die or something? Do you have a Google Doc going?
That's Link again. He looks so normal.
That's a lie.
I mean, he seems so nice. He's wearing a nice shirt. But
it is a nice shirt, isn't it?
Is a really twisted mind. And this is true. Deny it. I dare you to deny it. When it comes time to writing the chapter from the serial killer's point of view, Link writes those chapters because he understands how people like that think.
It's true. Just like Thomas Harris understood how Hannibal Lecter worked, I have the genius to understand how many different kinds of people work. So yes, when Doug needs to have the interesting chapters written, he always turns to me. And when the integumentary material has to be done, the opening, the closing, I give it to Doug. And that's how we work together.
So what you're saying is I'm not safe sitting up here next to you.
Well, here's an honest story. Doug was writing the end of the book I mentioned earlier, Cabinet of Curiosities, in which the bad guy is finally getting his. And he's been in a room full of poisons without knowing it, and handled them all and drunk a few, and so now he has 10 different poisons coursing through his veins. And so Doug wrote the first draft, and he had his throat was closing up, and he was getting a rash, and then I added. Well, he said he had a weeping sores and things like this,
and he added buboes and chancres. And,
it was so gross that when I stopped laughing, I had to add my own stuff to it. I knew our editor wouldn't let it through, but we had to have our fun, passing it back and forth. And the editor let it stay, so
It's funny because when Relic, how many of you saw the movie? Yeah. Anyway, so do you remember that scene where they're in a men's room at the Museum of Natural History and there's a brain lying on the floor underneath the urinal? Well, I remember writing that scene, that chapter, and thinking, this is so gross. This is really just as wonderfully gross and gruesome, and writing this chapter and really kind of laughing at how gruesome it was. And then I was invited to the premiere of the movie where they showed where the film was shown to the studio, right? So sitting next to the director, Peter Hyams, and all of a sudden that scene comes up, made into real life, visual. And here is this brain that looked like it was made out of plastic, lying on the floor of the bathroom, covered in ketchup. It was so fake looking, and I started to laugh hysterically. I thought, this is awful. Who wrote this? Oh, wait, I wrote that. And the director looked at me like, and I was, sorry, just a frog in my throat there. So.
He was the one who said that. Okay, I remember that. But there have been times that we have had to censor each other. There are a few times in the most recent book where Doug took out paragraphs of mine saying, this is just too grotesque. It's too awful. We can't subject our readers to this. And I have to do the same when he tries to write a sex scene. I say, this is too grotesque. It's too awful. We can't subject our readers to this.
Actually, that isn't what he said. He said, Doug, I read your sex scene, and all I can say is, I feel really sorry for your wife. I mean, I've never forgotten that. And then he rewrote it, and I had to feel sorry for his wife. So.
You took notes is what you did. Maybe we better go back to Mimi.
Sorry, we're getting a little out of control here. You got to tone us down.
I'm gonna rein you guys in. And so, I'm curious how you two met and how you teamed up. And to that point, how does writing a book with each other work? What does that process look like?
Well, I'll talk about how we met, and then Link will talk about how we write a book together. Because Lincoln was the editor for my first nonfiction book. I thought of myself as a very serious journalist. And I wrote a book.
Sorry.
And I wrote a book called Dinosaurs in the Attic, which was a nonfiction book about the Museum of Natural History where I worked. And I gave Link a tour at night of the museum, and all the lights had been turned out, and just the emergency lights were on. I thought it'd be really cool to show him the museum at midnight. And we did this tour, and we ended up like at 2 o'clock in the morning in the Hall of Dinosaurs, late dinosaurs. And Lincoln turned to me and said, my God, this is the scariest damn building in the world. We have got to write a thriller set in this building. And I said, Lincoln, I don't know how to write a thriller. And Lincoln said, well, I do. Because I've read so many bad manuscripts that I know exactly what not to do. And he said, he doesn't like it when I tell this story. And he said, I'm editing a book that I'm learning a lot from. It's called The Silence of the Lambs. And, it's really a wonderful thriller. I think I'm learning a great deal about how to write a thriller from this book, which I think is going to be a bestseller. Anyway, so that's how we got together. I'm going to cap that story with one little thing here.
Oh, God.
As we were talking about this novel we were going to write in the museum, a voice rang out, and here in the doorway of the dinosaur hall is a guard, and he's got a flashlight, and he's terrified. He said, "Who's there? Who's that? Who are those voices? What are you doing there? What are you doing in the museum?" And shining the light like this. And I thought, oh my God, I'm in trouble now because I'm an employee of the museum. I wasn't supposed to be there. But Lincoln said, "Doug, let me handle this." He said, "Thank God you found us. Thank God. We've been wandering around this place forever." And the guard said, "What? It's 2:00 in the morning. The museum closed at 5. Don't we know it? Oh my God, how do you find your way out of this place?" The guard was completely fooled. He took us out through the guard's entrance, the only way to get out, never asked for our IDs. And at that point I thought, this guy's going to make a really good partner.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug, and I have, without, any modesty. He has left me the boring part of the question to answer, so I'll try and keep this short, which is how we write together. Actually, it's not boring because I think a lot of people can't understand how two could write a novel together as opposed to a work of history or something. And publisher felt the same way when we were first trying to get published. And in fact, our first dozen books in England came out under Lincoln Preston, because they thought no one would buy a novel written by two people. What are they going to do? Do chapter 1 by him, 2 by this guy, 3 by him? And we realized immediately that wouldn't work out because Doug might want to kill off this guy named Hamlet in chapter 3, and I had this idea for a great scene in the graveyard in chapter 20, So what we decided to do was to plot the book out and then each write a segment of the book that was self-contained, whether it was a sequence of chapters or one character or the climax of the book or a subplot, and then the other would rewrite that. And we quickly learned to turn off document and compare because that was, that would have killed our partnership in book 4. And Doug will rewrite my prose, which makes me mad because it's already deathless and doesn't need any changes. And I take a rotor-rooter to his, and I do my best to plaster over, the egregious, that's behind the scenes stuff. You don't need to hear about that. But at the end of the day, the point is we put all 4 hands on almost every word in the book. And that's one reason why it seems very seamless. Most people don't know when one person writes a chapter when somebody else picks it up. Mm-hmm. And that's because we've both written everything, and we've all talked about it and argued about it and fought about what should happen earlier on. We don't plan it to the end of the book. That wouldn't give us room to be organic, but we plotted it enough so that we know where we're going, and we can say, Doug, you take these 3 chapters, Link, you take these 10 chapters, and go from there. But in all honesty, when he started out, Doug wrote the lion's share of the chapters. I, being an editor, and having a most fecund creative imagination, gave Doug the ideas for the chapters, and he then wrote them, and then I would rewrite them. But now, he didn't like doing all the writing, so eventually he realized what was happening, and now he's very careful to make sure we each, he has an Excel spreadsheet with a number of words we've each written, and now we write the books, I think, 50-50, although we each tend to champion a book. One of us keeps the other one going on it, and but beyond that, we're both involved 100%. I hope that explains how we work.
And so you've been doing this for 30 years? How long?
Now, why did you wonder? Since 1986.
Yeah, 1986, yeah.
Almost
Yeah.
40 then.
Yeah.
So you two must have a pretty good understanding of the other person's psyche and mind, right?
Oh, it's been awful.
We fight like an old married couple sometimes, you know.
I know, it's just terrible, nagging and, you know.
Yeah, and the sex
sniping
is
at
awful.
each
You know,
This is actually an onstage couples counseling session, just so you know.
yeah. Doug, I've been meaning to tell you something.
Don't touch me, don't.
Oh, this is special.
That's a good way to put it.
And I'm curious, so when you all were starting out, and even now, are there any authors or writers who have really like inspired you, or who you really think are doing cool things that sort of, you know, inspire some of the writing that you're doing today?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Doug.
Oh, do
continue.
you want to take this one?
Yeah, first, if you don't mind.
Please,
Yeah.
please. After you, my dear Alphonse.
Okay. Well, after he maligned me about Thomas Harris, you know, I should say Thomas Harris is definitely an influence, and he's brilliant at writing, not just, you know, from mass murderers' perspectives, but he knows just when to end a chapter, you know. And I learned from him, and I learned from a lot of film directors that you have to keep chapters short, bite-sized pieces, and always try and end at a place where the person has to read the next page. Because when we get emails saying, damn it, you know, I read your book till 4 in.the morning, and then I had to go to work, and now I can't see because I had to finish your stupid book. We know we've done our job properly then. But Michael Crichton was a fan. I mean, a fan. He was a big influence on us because our books were originally techno thrillers, and he was probably one of the first people since like H.G. Wells in that period to really meld science with a thriller. And as Doug would agree, we both are fans of 19th century authors like Wilkie Collins, Poe. I read Lovecraft. He's a bit newer. He warped me at age 8, and I haven't recovered since.
Dickens, you know, Conan Doyle. There's a lot of 19th century phraseology in our books that because both of us were useless English majors in college, and our parents were terrified that they were going to have to support us for the rest of our lives. But we did read a lot of books, and thank God we did, because, you know, I mean, Link must have read at least 5 or 10 books.
Oh, no, it's 11. Yeah, I just finished one last night.
And do you do a lot of research for your books? Because, you know, a lot of them, some of them have a historical basis or take place in really unusual locations. How much research do you do?
But we do a tremendous amount of research. And, like, for example, Angel of Vengeance takes place in New York City in 1880. And the amount of research that went into that was extraordinary. We had maps of New York City of 1880. We had, you know, went through huge archives of photographs of what life was like in 1880 and thereabouts. We read all about the 5 Points House of Industry, which really existed. You know, it was sort of an orphanage for children run by the Methodist Church, kind of a grim place. So a huge amount of research went into it. Link did a lot of that research, actually. He's really good at the historical research. As far as science goes, I have a background in physics and mathematics and astronomy, and so a lot of that kind of science I'm in charge of. Engineering as well. So yeah, we kind of divide it up, but we do a lot of research.
Doug is a polymath. He knows a bit about everything, so I can always rely on him to fill in some historical detail or some scientific detail. But we do a lot of historical research or scientific research when it's necessary. But I know, being an editor and a writer, as I'm sure everybody in this room knows, there's such a thing as a good historical novel and the historical novel where the author took 5 years to research, and they're going to shove every bit of that research down your throat during the course of the book. And I did the first 12 chapters of the prior Pendergast book, Cabinet of Dr. Lang, sight unseen by Doug, as an experiment. And there's a scene where Constance Greene goes into Tiffany to sell these jewels. And I did so much research, I found out what corner office they had in the 1880s, so the light would come in so he could look at the jewel, and Doug read the chapters and he called me back. He was almost in tears. These are so good, oh my God.
It's true. They were awesome chapters.
But I don't say that to feather my own nest, but we have a sense from all the books we've read and written of, a little bit goes a long way when you're doing historical research, especially if you put in a passing reference to something that nobody knows about, but is well known back then, and it just seems very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you could tell us what you're working on now and what we might expect. No pressure.
Well, we just submitted a manuscript to our publisher called Badlands. We have not heard back, except that she said she loved it, but we haven't gotten the dreaded editorial letter yet, which tells you what's wrong with it. It's a Nora Kelly, Corey Swanson novel. It takes place in New Mexico, and it involves a mysterious rash of suicides where women walk out into the Badlands of New Mexico and deliberately die from heat stroke and thirst and dehydration. And so that's sort of the premise. Again, no spoilers, but that's how it begins. So, and that'll be published in June of next year.
And we're also working on the next Pendergast book because we have to do 2 books a year or a book every 8 or 10 months. And we're happy to tell you, and we're thankful to tell you, that the newest one, Angel of Vengeance, will premiere a week from Sunday on the New York bestseller list at number 3. So thank you. Thank all of you. It'll immediately get, by the inrush of new books, but we're very humbled, because if it wasn't for our readers, we would be digging ditches or maybe grading papers, God. I don't know.
Grading roads or grading papers.
Grading roads or grading papers, yes. That's a good line. I'll have to remember that. But it's really true, during COVID, we were really unhappy because we couldn't have book signings anymore. And that's really how we connect with our audience. Writing is a very lonely job. Doug and I have both written solo novels. He's written solo nonfiction books. But when you're by yourself, there's nobody but you and the word processor for company. And there's also that nagging fear that you're zigging when you should be zagging, and you won't find out for another 20 chapters that you went the wrong way. But with a writing partner that you respect and trust.
Thank you.
I do trust him as far as I can throw him. And we can BS together and talk about what fine fellows we are and get a little work done here and there. We can talk if we get caught up, or if we're at some kind of a dead end, or if we get writer's block, which doesn't really happen so much as we get difficult logistical issues. And so we've learned that it's nice to have someone to write with. So anyway, what was the question?
I'll ask you one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. So if we have any novices here in the room, where would you recommend they start? You have so many books. What's the first one they should pick up?
Well, I think that the first book, Relic, is a good book to start with. or The Cabinet of Curiosities. Those are the two that I think are worth starting with. A lot of those early novels, except for Relic, which had a sequel called Reliquary, were all standalone books. So you can kind of start. You could also read Still Life with Crows. But how many of you here, was Cabinet of Curiosities your favorite book? Because we hear from a lot of people who, you like that book? All right. Cabinet, start with Cabinet.
Well, like I said, we'd love to open this up to the audience. So there's a microphone up here if you want to come up and ask questions, and we'll do that for the next 15 minutes or so. Oh, there's two. Never mind. I'm sorry.
Hi, big fan. Since you already asked the question about your process, I was wondering, Cabinet of Curiosities. So I did have the flu, and I had a fever, and I was medicated, but that book scared the crap out of me, really creepy. To this day, I still just, anytime it's mentioned, I'm like, oh my God. So I'm wondering if you have a favorite of your books or a least favorite that you just had to write because the publisher was like, we need a book.
Well, our books are like our children, so it's a little bit hard to choose favorites. But I have to say that I think The Cabinet of Curiosities was one of my favorites. Still Life with Crows. A couple of the Nora Kelly books I think were pretty good, like Diablo Mesa. And which was the worst one? That's an even more interesting question. What do you think? What's the book you shouldn't read of ours?
Okay, my favorites are usually the newest one. I mean, I really like Angel of Vengeance because we put so much work and effort into finishing up the trilogy. But I also like Blue Labyrinth because it has so many unusual settings. And we'd heard at the time that Pendergast, he's like a Superman. Nothing ever happens to him. This is getting boring. So we made sure he really got his rear kicked in that book, and Constance really got up to speed on that. So as far as the worst goes, I want to quickly say, we never crank a book out just to get it out in time because we just can't work that way. We love every book as we're working on it, and sometimes in retrospect, we see maybe we could have done it differently. And if I had to name one candidate, it would probably be Wheel of Darkness.
Yeah,
Wheel of Darkness.
Yeah. They don't start with that book.
Hi. First of all, I want to say thank you. You do listen to your readers. Myself and a friend wrote an email to you a few years back about how a man assumed credit for Corey and Nora's work at the end of your book. You replied, you agreed, and we did note the subplot in the next book where you fixed that. So thank you very much. And my question is, are there any developments in your characters that have surprised you as readers? And my friend Mary would also like to know if you have any characters you regret writing.
Our characters always surprise us. I mean, as we're writing them, they all seem to take on the force of personality of our characters pushes us in certain directions that we weren't expecting. So when we outline our books, we never try to write too detailed an outline because then it's like marionettes, So often, one character who never does what she's supposed to do is Constance. I mean, she is crazy, and she does stuff that just goes off the wall and it pulls the book in a crazy direction. And, if we ignore her, that's to our peril. Because, she is not to be ignored. So she's definitely the most unpredictable, wild character in our books. I mean,
I know where she's going, but we just don't tell Doug where she's going.
Yeah. But Pendergast is also quite unpredictable. We'll say, oh, here's what Pendergast is going to do. We'll have him all outlined 5 chapters ahead. And Pendergast is like, hell no. And that isn't what he says. He says, absolutely not. No, I'm going off that way. And then we're chasing after him.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm a big fan as well. I've been reading your books most of my life. They're good friends to me. I'm wondering what draws you to particular locations or landscapes. I'm a New Mexico native, so I'm excited to read your next book. I wonder what maybe drew you to New Mexico as the backdrop for some of your locations.
Well, we like to write about areas that we know really well. And since I live in New Mexico, in Santa Fe, we're familiar with it. And so that's, we used to live in New York City for many years, so we're familiar with that. The Florida, the chapters, the books that are set in Florida, it's because Link lives in Florida. He did used to live in New Jersey. We have not set a book in New Jersey, and we do not intend to set a book in New Jersey. Sorry, Link. But it's really based on what we know. And we visit, or one of us at least, visits every locality we can so that we aren't writing out of ignorance.
Well, thank you for keeping New Mexico on the map.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. I'll try to ask this with giving as few spoilers as I can, but the end of Bloodless kind of expands the possibilities of what you guys have created and kind of goes in a different route that maybe some of your earlier books didn't. And I was curious if that is something you did just to tell this story, or if you're going to write more books in this kind of vein of type of story.
Are you talking about a certain machine or a certain creature?
Yes.
The machine plays its only role in the two books that follow, and Constance makes sure it won't play any more role after that. So,
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
But it, we don't write science fiction, but we do often write a lot of science and true science as a concrete base for our books, so we can then build, a fabrication on top. So when we have a brain-eating monster, who's morphed because of the plants that he chewed on, your disbelief has been suspended because we started out with all those, equations and things like that were true. So it's not science fiction, but there is a lot of physics behind it.
Thank you.
Hi. I almost forgot my question. In one of your earlier books, Pendergast is married, and he and his wife are on safari, and his wife gets killed. And then several books later, I found out why she was killed. But my question to you is, does Pendergast ever get remarried? And if so, why?
No, Pendergast never gets remarried.
Oh, okay.
Well, we don't know what might happen in the future, but he certainly has not remarried now.
Right.
He has no intention of remarrying whatsoever. He is not going to entangle himself up like that again.
Okay, thank you.
The people have asked various questions about certain people that he might be interested in, or a certain person, but we closed the door on that figuratively and literally in Angel of Vengeance. So
Maybe.
Maybe.
No spoilers.
Hi. If Relic were remade today as a movie, who would each of you like to see cast as Margot and Pendergast?
Let me answer the Pendergast part, if you if
Yeah,
I may.
please, yeah.
This is a question we've been asked many times for obvious reasons, because people want to see a movie, a remake of the movie, or what we would like to see, and what we hope is happening, is Paramount is going to be making a new.
They're making a television
film,
series.
a
They're actually
television
making a
series.
television series now. They're
Based
gonna-
on Cabinet of Curiosities.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, the answer has aged with the books. So it used to be Christopher Walken, or and then it was Benedict Cumberbatch, and then Matthew McConaughey, and now we more or less decided that it should be an unknown. Nobody else could really fit the bill, because he's so unique, and he was in the first drafts of the movie, the script, and he ended up on the cutting room floor because nobody could write him. And I think you really need a new, brilliant face, an actor to play him. As for Margot,
I don't know. I have such a clear picture of her in my head that it's so clear that no actress that I know resembles her, or could play her. So, I can't really. Again, maybe an unknown person.
if there's a casting call, we'll let you know. Okay.
Okay, so Relic was one of the first books I snuck out of the adult section of the library. So thank you guys so much for the education. So two-part. One, have either of you had a Pendergast style suit ever tailored with all the little hidden pockets? But also, technology features so big in all your novels, and of course, they've progressed over time. Has it been harder to write because of technology that has changed over time, or is it becoming easier in terms of developing your plot?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because the appearance of the cell phone has made everything so difficult to write these books, because anyone is a cell phone call away. Everyone's carrying a cell phone. There's coverage everywhere. So many plots of books, thrillers, are based on someone being trapped, being unable to communicate, and so all of a sudden technology kind of ruins that. To solve that problem, our next Pendergast novel takes place before Relic. It's the case immediately preceding Relic, and it takes place in the 1980s.
Oh, wow.
And so Pendergast has he might have a radio, but he has no cell phone. If he wants to call somebody, he's got to go to find a payphone or whatever. And so we've had a lot of fun going back and reimagining or reacquainting ourselves with the technology of the 80s.
Yeah.
And that's been fun.
They're little time capsules, every last one of them. I love rereading.
Yeah, and it's funny. It doesn't seem like 1980 was so long ago, but damn,
we were using
old.
We were using fax machines, to communicate back then. But to address your question, I used to be a programmer in one of my many lives, and I've kept up with the discipline, and we often get emails saying, "This is wrong. You don't have this dot here." And I said, "It wasn't wrong when I wrote it, But I wrote a book, a scene in the book that's coming out with Corey Swanson next, where she uses AI to track down, to help narrow the series of suspects. And so I did a lot of research, and I said, let's use this brand new thing that Microsoft is coming out with in like 2 years called Copilot, and and I introduced it all, and I made up a special corporate version, militarized for the FBI, and then in the end, I had to take it all out because AI suddenly became the best thing since sliced bread, and now Copilot's already available. So I had to rip that out and change it. So there are problems involved, but not necessarily the kind that a reader might consider.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Well, I think we have time for one more question, and I'll ask it. You just mentioned that there's a TV show coming out. Is that right? About Cabinet of Curiosities?
That's right. The movie Relic, The Relic, came out in 1997, and Paramount bought the rights. We didn't really realize it. We couldn't wait to get the check, so we signed the contract that we shouldn't have signed. But they locked up forever all the characters in Relic, forever, including Pendergast. Even though Pendergast wasn't in the movie, they still locked up his character. So for the last 30 years, Paramount has refused to do anything with Pendergast. And no one else can do anything with that character because Paramount has the film and television rights. So finally, they came to us and they said, we want to do a television series based on Pendergast, starting with Cabinet of Curiosities. And we spoke to the writer, and I think they really understand that changing the character is not going to happen. And, our readers are really want to see Pendergast as presented in the books on television, no changes. So they're working on it. We've talked to the writer, and he's really seems like a smart guy and funny and has a good record. So we have high hopes.
That's exciting. Do you have any idea when it'll come out or who will be in it or anything? Or?
No, we don't. I don't even think we've been paid yet. We just signed this contract, so,
I'm tempted to say when hell freezes over, but I think we've had our hearts broken many times in the last 20 years with, film projects or TV projects. But this seems like this time it's the real thing, and there's real momentum behind it. And so we're really hopeful that this is going to be the time we get the boutique series, and Pendergast gets the audience that we, anyway, feel that he deserves.
I'm excited. All right, one last question. If there are any aspiring thriller writers in the room, what is your advice to them?
Well, I have a couple of things. First of all, read every day. Second, write every day. Writing is not like writing's a lot like playing the violin. If you want to go to Carnegie Hall, you got to practice every day, not 5 days a week, don't take 2 weeks off. You practice every day, you write every day. That's really important. And the third thing is to explain to your family that you have a sacred hour every day you're going to write, and you are not to be interrupted. Because people, if you're a doctor, they don't show up in the operating room. Oh, I can't find the phone. Where did I leave my phone? But they do that if you're writing. They think, oh, they're just writing. I can interrupt them. You got to explain to your loved ones that you have this sacred hour of writing every day, and you are not to be interrupted. So those three things: write every day, read every day, and block off that sacred hour. And I think that's my advice anyway.
I'll add to that. I would add, write about what you know, a little bit at least. My grandmother, who was a writer, always told me that. You don't have to know it well, but at least write it so it's believable. Write a story that you would like to read yourself. Take a favorite author. Don't plagiarize or copy them, but what is it about their style that you like? So writing should be something that's fun, not something that you have to do. And I would just change Doug's sacred hour slightly, which is you have 1 hour to yourself that cannot be interrupted unless your dungeon group for World of Warcraft comes up and you have to go online.
All right.
Seems like a really good place to leave it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Give it up for them.